narrative storytelling, oral history type session with some of the people who are our heroes in activism, and to have them think about their own girlhoods and what activism looks like, and how their personal histories led them both to activism at early ages as teens and young women in their 20s, and also how their childhood histories led them to where they are today. And so we're just so pleased to have every one of you here, and as well as our moderator. I love you all, and I'm so impressed with the work that you've done and are continuing to do. Okay, so, and now I'll introduce our panel. And the title of the panel is Global Black Girl Politics, Activists Reflect on Youth Justice and Girlhood. We have Janaé Bonsu. Janaé is a Black queer feminist activist, organizer, and PhD student of social work at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She currently serves as the National Public Policy Chair on the Black Youth Project 100, an activist member-led organization of Black 18 to 35-year-olds dedicated to creating justice and freedom for all Black and oppressed people. We also have Palesa, Ditsie. Bev is an artist, an activist, a television writer-director, best known for her human rights advocacy and human rights documentaries. Having started acting at the age of 10 and having been a prominent queer rights activist since the age of 17, Ditsie understands the medium of television and its impact on society. She was born in Orlando West, Soweto, South Africa in 1971. She was a founding member of the first multiracial LGBTI organization in South Africa, GLOW, in 1989. In a major visibility campaign, she also became the first Black lesbian to come out publicly in the media, challenging discrimination against queer people. She has written, directed, and consulted in over 20 documentaries, and her first documentary film is Simon and I, 2001, which won a number of awards, and I have to say, students love it. If you're a teacher, teach it. Phindile Kunene holds an MA in history from Wits. Her research explored the history of the local state in South Africa, youth political activism, apartheid forms of co-option, and youth political demobilization. She has also explored post-apartheid forms and repertoires of collective action and protest. She is a contributor to the recently published collection of Student Politics, Students Must Rise, Youth Struggle in South Africa Before and Beyond Soweto in 1976. She is an activist herself, and she has been involved in youth and student movements, trade unions, and currently works as an educator and curriculum specialist at the Tushimani Center for Activist Education. We also have with us today Denise Oliver-Velez. She is a social justice activist, feminist, and applied anthropologist, currently teaching anthropology and women's studies at SUNY New Paltz. She's a contributing editor for the progressive political blog Daily Cost, for which she writes weekly Sunday morning features covering race, gender, and culture. She is a former member of the Young Lords Party, serving as their Minister of Economic Development, and was the first woman on their Central Committee. She is also a former member of the Black Panther Party. If you don't know about the Young Lords Party, ask somebody. She worked in community media and public broadcasting for many years and was a co-founder and program director of Pacifica's first minority-controlled radio station in Washington, D.C., and a program director for WNYC-TV in New York. And she was also the executive director of the Black Filmmaker Foundation. And as our moderator, we have Claudrena. She is an associate Associate Professor of African American and African Studies and History. In 2007, she published her first book, The Rise and Fall of the Garvey Movement in the Urban South. In 2013, the University of Virginia Press published The Punitive Turn, New Approaches to Race and Incarceration, a volume that she co-edited with Deborah McDowell and Juan Battle. And her latest book, which I'm super excited about, is New Negro Politics in the Jim Crow South, which was published by the University of Georgia Press. As part of her ongoing work on the history of Black student activism at UVA, she wrote, produced, and co-directed 2 short films, Sugar-Coated Arsenic and We Demand. Sugar-Coated, they both have been filmed internationally, and
I'm the fastest man in the state, just premiered.
Oh, and the fastest man in the state. I am so excited to have her moderating, and I think we have a wonderful panel, and I feel like we are all very lucky. So thank you all.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for including me. It's great to be here, and it's a lot of good energy here. As my mom often says, you know, I like that space, I like that spirit. That's not always the case at conferences. So it's a pleasure to be here and participate in what I know will be a lively and fruitful conversation and exchange of ideas. And I feel so blessed and so lucky to be sitting with 4 transformative activists, scholars, and artists. And I want to sort of begin with a sort of general question that will perhaps provide you with an opportunity to sort of talk about your political trajectory. When you got the invitation to come here, what did you think? And I say that, well, not about UVA, but the theme of Black girlhood, and within the context of your political trajectory and your current work. And I'll just share the mic.
Yeah, I know what you just said about the energy in this room. I feel really good right now. But yeah, so when I first got the invitation to come here, and just thinking about Black girlhood in the context of my politic and my trajectory, I was, you know, to be honest, my initial thought was, I don't know if I'm the right person to speak on that. Because, you know, when I think about the point at which I was really politicized or like really activated in an overtly political way, that didn't happen until grad school, really. I was 22, 23 when I first joined BYP 100, and that was my introduction into activism and political organizing. But the more that I thought about it and the more I reflected, I'm like, you know, I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for the compounded experiences of my entire life that led me to this point, right? There was experiences that led me to even choose the type of program that I chose, right, to end up in Chicago, and, you know, so, you know, the more I thought about it, I'm like, okay, I think I might have something to contribute to this conversation. But yeah, I don't know how long we should spend on this one question, but actually that is a question that I have, of like how much we should get into some of these answers, but I want to hog the mic, but also there's some other things that I can add.
Right, we can just keep it.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, thank you. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you to the organizers. I got the invitation, I think it was from Lakeisha, and I just went, hi, it's a joke. And I think it took about a week to go back to it, because similarly, I didn't see myself being an activist. I was just being me, being rebellious, and doing what felt like needed to be done. And so it didn't occur to me that this is some kind of big deal to be part of a kind of a brand new organization and marching down the street And in fact, until that very first Pride March, somebody said, you know, this is the first LGBT Pride in Africa. And I'm like, what? So, you know, a lot of the stuff that we were doing as young ones, for me, was just what needed to be done. And if not me, then who? Also, I was growing up in a very kind of politicized space, being from Soweto and having been kind of influenced by this 1976 youth uprisings, even though I was 5 years old. I remember my mom kept saying, it's the young people that are rising. It's the youth that are trying to change the system. And I understood a little bit of what that was because I was already living in a very kind of politicized home. I grew up in a maternal household where I was constantly questioning, and I was lucky that both my grandmother and my mother didn't hide things from me. So they would answer honestly whenever I asked, you know, why are we in this situation? Why don't we have lights? Where's water? You know, whatever it was, I kept getting honest answers. And so I grew up politicized, but I would never have said that then. I didn't know what that was then. So yeah, I took about 3 weeks to actually respond to the email, and I had to read it and keep rereading it, and then I got excited. So, yay, back to the States, wait, it's Trump, wait. Oh shit, you know. And that's before I cut my locks, so I was like, okay, I'm sure I'm less of a threat. As long as I don't have my tie on. I'm gonna pass the mic.
Good evening to everyone. It's an absolute honor to be here. I think similar to Janaé, when I got the invitation, I worried first about legitimacy and credibility. I got, I think, politicized at 18, 19, first year university. A lot of my experiences before then I didn't consider necessarily political. So, and then I started thinking about maybe the invitation comes at a time when I started reflecting on my own political activism, perhaps more critically. So I thought it's an opportunity to actually put something together, start thinking more critically about what my role has been and the step back that I've taken, and how do I basically go back, and do I understand my years before 18, before first year at university political, or do I read them in different ways, in other terms? I think I'll go into the personal stuff when we talk a little bit more, yeah.
When I got the email, I was like, this is a conference with little girls. They don't want to hear from anybody who's 70 years old. I'm old. So I didn't read it well. I just thought, and I was like, they sent this to the wrong person. And then I read it. And then I also understood that there were going to be sisters here from South Africa, and I was thrilled, having grown up through anti-apartheid movement. I have to say that my experience was very different. I was political from the time I dropped out of my mother's womb. No, seriously, I grew up in a very political family. My grandfather identified himself as a race man. And my father was a fellow traveler. All of my parents' friends were out of the Harlem Renaissance tradition of being in the Communist Party. And, you know, like Paul Robeson comes and sings happy birthday to you when you are 6 years old. And so I'm saying I didn't know that there was a world that wasn't political. And living in New York, and there were black intellectuals and mostly non-practicing Jewish communist intellectuals. And, you know, you could throw in a few Puerto Ricans and whatever else, but I'm saying it was a very, there were folk singers and there were union organizers. My grandfather was in the sleeping car porter organizing with Eiffel and Randolph. So I didn't know that people weren't political. And it was later, moving out of that bubble, that I was just like, I went into complete and total catatonic shock. You know, I didn't know that. And in fact, I became a Panther because I was rebelling against my boring communist parents. If I had to read one more piece of Lenin, I was going to throw up. You know? So it was better like, off the pig, let's get out in the street, you know? And so that's, my perspective is a little weird, and I will leave it at that.
I guess the next question, in keeping with that, is sort of politicization. How did that intersect with your feeling of being a girl? When were you conscious of being a black girl? And all of the beauty and all of the complexity that entailed. Political becoming and the process of girlhood. Could you say a little bit about that? Oh, anyway.
Okay, yeah, maybe I'm not the right one to go, because, okay, wait, I still have to respond to the question, right? I was never aware that I was a girl for probably until my early teens, when all of a sudden there's boobs and there's bleeding and period pains. I wasn't aware that I was a girl. But having said that, I was constantly being made aware that I was a girl by the different uncles and neighbors and all the different people that were trying to touch and that were trying to do more than just touch. But in my head, there was something wrong with them, not just because I was a child, but because I wasn't a girl. And so that crisis culminated in my early teens, when I then came across the words that could identify, and lesbian was the closest thing because that was the only thing that existed. So, you know, gender fluid, all these are very new, and that's probably how I would have identified then had I known those words, but that was the closest thing, and even that word was a crisis in a black, very cultural, very religious home. And of course, my maternal grandmother, who, you know, she's the love of my life, who didn't want me hanging out with the boys, was on the one hand kind of, oh, fantastic, because that means we're not going to have an early pregnancy, but on the other hand, it was like, something's wrong, let's take her to, you know, traditional healers and all of that, and let's try to make sure that, you know, she grows up to be a girl. And so I feel like I was forced into being aware of being something that I didn't identify with for a long time. And by the time I started identifying with it, I started realizing that I didn't want to be that, because that just felt so powerless. But I think the confusion for me was also watching my grandmother being this powerhouse, this tower of strength, this person that just navigated not just my home in the household, but our entire neighborhood. And everyone who was in trouble came to my home for whatever reason. And so I had to kind of play in between that space where I was on the one hand looking up to her and saying, but women are powerful, but on the other hand, but am I a woman? And so those politics played themselves out for me through being, you know, joining and being part of the LGBTI movement, where for the first time I felt like I belonged and that meant something to me. But then also having to fight within that space because the gay men were dominating, and according to them, being gay meant everything. It meant, you know, you're a woman, so it's the same issues. But they didn't even see us as women because, you know, because again, we didn't have language. The girls used to, you know, the women, girls used to say, you know, all the boys, girl, and vice versa. So to a lot of the guys, I was, you know, my brother, which was happiness because they were, you know, recognizing me as a boy, and I would then identify with them as a girl. So, you know, those politics kind of, one can't run away from them. And I think it was really when I started looking at myself being a girl at 17, 18 within the movement that for the first time I actually said, I am a girl and I have to identify and make sure that girl voices like mine are heard, because if there is no lesbian standing up, then the myth continues that only gay men exist and that there are no lesbians, because what is that? Plus you're African, plus you're traditional, plus, you know, that doesn't exist. So that became critical for me to then begin to identify as that in order to then, it was for myself more than for anything else, but then it ended up being for everybody else that started coming out afterwards. I'm hoping that yeah, okay, all right. I'll stop there, I'm sure this conversation continues.
Okay, I suppose for me there were a number of things. If I'm to describe my experience or me coming to realize that I was a girl, it was this whole notion of a constant rehearsal at failure. So some of the words that I heard constantly growing up was, why do you look like a boy? Are you a boy or a girl? Why do you speak like a boy? Why do you keep the company of so many boys? Why are you not comfortable playing with other girls? Or doing the things that other girls do, or appreciating the things that other girls do? But there was a contradiction there, because when it came to some of the roles that are associated with girls, I was very good at performing them. So helping my mom to clean the house and to do all of those things, I performed quite well, but the source of quarrel and the source of a very strange relationship with my mom always came when it related to the performance of gender and me not fitting this mold of what a normal girl is supposed to do. So I remember being bought a Barbie girl doll, a Barbie. So this thin doll with very long hair, and it was basically, I think it was basically a way of my father winning my affection. He was separated with my mother at the time, and so he bought us these expensive gifts. Bought my sister a different gift, but somehow chose a Barbie doll for me, which I obviously, because I couldn't care about this person that didn't look like me or even reflect me in any way, I sort of left it or neglected it outside, and other kids found more value in it. And then I was constantly reminded of this Barbie doll that I lost, which cost 100 Rand, which is just slightly over $10 in today's denomination. So I was constantly, it was a lot of money for my mom, and I was constantly reminded of this doll that I lost, but I just couldn't understand what was the big deal, because I didn't even enjoy playing with that. But of course, most of these things changed with puberty. When I received my first menstrual period, I felt like the world is collapsing. And then like the boobs came, and then the hips came, and all of a sudden there's this whole lot of attention. And I was 12 at the time, whole lot of attention from men, being sexualized and being seen differently, and spent quite a lot of time hating that particular body. Even though I thought maybe this body is a way of answering that question, why do you look like a boy? Because all of a sudden nobody was asking me, why do I look like a boy anymore? And I think that's sort of the conundrum that I'm still trying to resolve even now. So yeah, the notions of being a girl come with contradictions in my life, performing these other gender roles, perhaps more better than my sister, and yet failing in other respects.
I want to separate the two things, because I think as a child, I was lucky that I didn't have parents that forced me into a girl role, because I was very not, I was like, from the time I was 3, I want a dump truck. And my aunt bought me this stupid Madame Alexander doll. You have to be really old to know they're made of porcelain dresses, and they have a museum full of them in Brooklyn. And I was like, and plus you can't play with them because they were like really expensive. And I was like, this is really stupid. I want my dump truck. And I was allowed, and we're talking, I was born in 1947, so we're talking the early 50s, and my mother would allow me to wear jeans. nowadays, you all are used to women wearing pants. You can go to school and wear pants. That did not exist. You know, girls wore dresses and skirts and things. And my aunts were very upset that my mother put me in dungarees, in jeans, because, you know, she's going to be strange if you allow her to dress in this non-conforming way. So I was not good with this girl stuff. And then on top of it, growing up in the black community and being around the Latino community, I weighed like 72 pounds soaking wet. I was totally flat-chested. They used to say, oh, they call me Olive Oil, like from Popeye, because my last name is Oliver. Or Denise is a pirate's treasure. She's got a sunken chest. This came from girls. And it did not make me very happy with girls. I did not have chest, nor ass, nor thighs, nor hips, nor big legs, and no, the stuff that you're supposed to have. And people said to me, oh, you look like Twiggy. I was like, great, I have to go be white to be accepted or something. No, seriously, it was very difficult being a girl, and then on top of it being a black girl, and you know, being very militantly black, and then colorism came in. You know, so I, who had been raised in a family that was very proud of being black, all of a sudden the Black Arts Movement came along, and I was working as a teenager in the Truth Coffee Shop in Harlem, you know, and like starry-eyed, you know, because there was Imam Baraka, and he had just changed from being Leroy, you know. We will not even go into that. But, you know, I'm starstruck. I'm in Harlem, and I'm getting to work at like, you know, it's like a beatnik cafe in Harlem, and all the writers and poets and playwrights and all those people came in there, and I was just thrilled because this was like really black. And then this lunatic named Hassan, Donald Washington, he was beige, and he was like, you gotta get you half-breed bitches out of Harlem. You know, and I was like, I'm like a teenager, starstruck. And he started picking on me. He would come and order, I didn't order that. It's not hot, take it back to the kitchen. It's this, it's that. He picked on you, and he kept referring to my skin color. And that was what was going on at that period in time, to be black. You know, I was black. And like, but they telling me I'm not. Finally, I got so tired of him, he ordered chili. He told me it tested. I took the bowl of chili and dumped it in his damn lap. Yeah, but I shouldn't have done that. He ran out and he came back with a gun to kill me. You know, shoot me. Yes, 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 yes. And there were these two really nice gentlemen who I used to serve tea to, and they used to play chess. Because it was one of those coffee houses. People, intellectuals, played chess. One was in Chaka Zulu, and he taught martial arts, and the other one was somebody I didn't know. He had sort of like freckles. And that brother got up and got in front of Hassan and stepped right in front of the gun. And I peed on myself because I thought I was dead. No, I'm serious. I had urine trickling down my leg. This brother said, brother, blackness has nothing to do with skin color. And Hassan turned white and spun around and ran out the door, him and his gun. And I went back to the owner and I said, oh, who is that guy with the freckles? And he said, girl, you dumb. That's Minister Malcolm. And I was like, oh, I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know he had freckles. And I just knew he was a nice man who played chess with Chaka Zulu and ordered tea and was very polite. Always said thank you, my sister. But that was the end of my, do not tell me I am not black. Okay? I don't want to hear it because Minister Malcolm said something. Thank you very much.
Black girlhood for a culmination of distinct experiences that are separate, but very much so tied up with my body and sexuality. I mean, outside of the times where I would visit my dad, so I was born in Brooklyn and raised in South Carolina. My mom, when I was about 5 years old, said she wanted a different type of quality of life to raise me in, so we moved to South Carolina where my maternal grandparents are. My dad still lived in Brooklyn, and so I would visit him in the summers. And so he was a, single black man, bachelor, with this little girl every summer. He didn't know what to do with my hair. He didn't know what to do. So outside of the times where we're on the way to Harlem on 125th Street, so I can get my hair braided, he'd just be talking shit like, man, I wish he was a boy. I could just take you to the barbershop and spend, $15. I mean, so outside of the shade that he threw me every summer from there, really my cognizance of my girlhood was really when I began to develop body. And so I had the opposite problem you had. You said you didn't have enough of, I had too much too early. I started puberty at 9 years old, right? I had boobs and hips and butt in elementary school. And so definitely warranted unwanted male attention and just this objectification and fetishization of just like, not being seen as a person, but as body parts. From there going into when I had my first girlfriend, I, had all my male classmates telling me that I was too cute to be gay. Just so there's that, and then in terms of just blackness, the first time that I was called a nigger on a playground in elementary school by someone, I remember his name too, James Sitter, was comfortable enough to call me a nigger to my face, but going from there home, not being black enough for my, neighborhood friends. So I, like I said, lived in Columbia, South Carolina, in a all-black neighborhood, and the school that I was zoned for, I guess wasn't a quote good school relative to the school that I would be zoned for if I lived with my grandparents. So my mom and some illegal stuff had me down, had my grandparents' address as our residence so I can go to the better school, which of course was the white school, right? I've always been a nerd. I've always loved reading, had a vocabulary that was relatively bigger than my peers. And so, I guess I spoke a certain way that, was not black enough for my neighborhood friends, and whatever black enough means, right? And so I'm 9 to 5 or 7 to 4, whatever times we were in school, I'm in this like lily white environment, where I'm like the Oreo crumb in the cup of milk, and then I go home and it's just like, you ain't nothing but a white girl in a black girl body, you did it, and so really just those were when my questions of like, what does it mean to be black, what is blackness really started, because to have my maternal grandmother be born on a plantation and work as a sharecropper from the time she was 5 years old, to my paternal grandmother being Ghanaian and lives in Ghana right now. I'm like literally African American. You telling me I'm not black enough? What does that mean, right? So having those questions, having of my blackness, of what it meant to have someone, not be interested in talking to me until after I passed them when they saw how big my booty was, or like, just like those things of like the intersection of my sexuality and my gender, and just my blackness, and what that means for how people respect me or not, how people talk to me, how I'm just able to engage with the world. There's just a spectrum of experiences that you know, inadvertently or not, definitely shaped just the level of how unapologetic I am when I say that I'm a Black queer feminist today. So.
The thing that I appreciate about all of you is you're activists rooted in organizations. And I think sometimes young Black girls and young people just in general really struggle to navigate organizations and an activist life. The Young Lords, the average member was 17, I think.
And we had 1, 2, or 12.
So I wonder if you could talk about activism and the importance for a lot of young people out there, the importance of organizations.
Can you also share what the organizations are?
Yeah, I mean, I think organization is super important. With BYP 100 or BYP for Black Youth Project 100, I tell the story of its founding all the time like I was there, but I actually wasn't. But you know, in July, so just to start, Black Youth Project is a research initiative started by Kathy Cohen at the University of Chicago. Y'all don't know Kathy Cohen, look her up, super dope, political scientist. Because in the field of political science, especially at that time in 2004, I think is when she started it, no one was really checking for the attitudes, experiences, beliefs, etc. of young Black people. Like it just wasn't a priority in political science at all. And so that was what Kathy was trying to combat and disrupt with the Black Youth Project. And so there was an advisory council that was made up of some young people that she was working with. That was birthed in 2012, and they had the idea to convene young activists, artists, writers, policy wonks, tech folks, just young Black folks from across the political spectrum and from across the country to come together in the same room to talk about what does mobilization and just like movement look like beyond electoral politics. And so, you know, after a year of planning and Kathy securing the resources, in July 2013, what was called the Beyond November movement convening happened right outside of Chicago. And, you know, I don't believe in coincidences, so I can't say that it was a coincidence. I believe that it was fate that same weekend was when the George Zimmerman verdict was announcing the killing of Trayvon Martin. So when we learned that the announcement, the verdict was going to be announced, and people decided to experience that verdict together. And when it came down not guilty, when he was acquitted, as you can imagine, a room full of about 100 young Black people, you know, experiencing this collective heartbreak, a collective trauma, this collective like just reinforcement of the devaluation of Black life in America. It was an agitational moment. You know, and everyone responded in different ways, but it was that moment was a catalyst. It was a catalyst to not just movement building broadly. That same week was when the Black Lives Matter hashtag was co-created. I mean, there was movement across the country, but in that moment, that was when BYP 100 as an organization was agitated into existence. And so now, almost 4 years later, it's a national organization with 8 chapters across the country and growing. And so, just that as context, I came into BYP 100 about 6 months after that founding moment. And, you know, with it being so early in the organization's history, we were still figuring a lot of things out. But especially at that time, 3 years ago, you know, being an organization that is comprised of, led by, you know, all young Black people, we didn't have a handbook for what it means to be trying to build an organization and a movement at the same time. Because that's hard, right? Organizations are important because they are they're spaces, they're containers for political education, they're containers for leadership development, they're containers for base building, for bringing other people into the movement. It's one thing to have a rally or a protest and be like, yeah, fight the power, not everybody goes home with like no action items. Like you have to, organizations help contain that, right? And to keep momentum going. That's the difference between mobilizing and organizing. And I remember the first mobilization that I had ever attended, I was 9 years old. It was 2000, MLK weekend. Again, being in South Carolina, up until, very recently, the Confederate flag was flying over the State House unapologetically. And so that mobilization of thousands of black people in Columbia, I didn't even know that there was that many black people out here in Columbia until that weekend, and I was just like, man, this is beautiful, like this is great, like we're all coming together for this common goal to like get this white supremacist, like oppressive symbol off the State House. And then after that, there was nothing. Like there was no follow-up, and so that was disheartening. So I see organizations as a way to combat that, as a way to really sustain movement. And so when you're trying to do that, but also be attuned to the fact that the revolution will not be funded. So you got to fundraise, you got to create structures to bottom line things. You can have all these action items, but if you don't know how to delegate, if there's not people in formal roles, if there's just so much to organization and movement building that is very difficult, but it's necessary. And that's not to say that people's only entry point or contribution to movement has to be within the context of an organization, because that's not the case. But I don't think movement can be sustained without it.
Yeah, I agree. And there's nothing wrong with demonstrations. I don't think you're right, but I don't see us progressing and moving forward without structure and without organization. And I've had young people say to me, "Oh, who funded you all? Did you all have grants?" Yeah. Grants for the Black Panther Party, right? It is so key to have structure. And I know one of my biggest critiques, as an older person looking at things because we are allowed to criticize. We're not going to take over. We are not going to tell you what you have to do, because that's your stuff. But we can criticize. I looked at the insanity of this, what is it, Occupy Wall Street? My chair. Yeah, okay. And what did they accomplish? They were telling people, don't vote. Excuse me, people in my family died to bring in vote. They died. And I take that very seriously. And I'm not saying that only electoral politics is the solution, because you have to have multiple approaches. But ultimately, permanent change tends to get made in this country through judicial and legislative kind of action. So you cannot afford to ignore that. I was in St. Louis and I went to see the statue of Dred and Harriet Scott. And I like to, and they never bring up Harriet. They always just talk about Dred, But it's Dred and Harriet Scott. And we need to keep that in mind. Yes, that's history, but a Supreme Court is quite capable of making another one of those kind of decisions. And we have to be very, very careful. And we have to be very, very organized. And I sat on a panel in Minnesota recently with some young people who would say, all of y'all don't vote because you won't achieve nothing. It won't get you anywhere. And I interrupted and said, that's bullshit. Because, I'm sorry, there are multiple approaches, but one of them is you must be organized. I went to Raleigh, North Carolina, and there were 80,000 people marching in Raleigh. This was 2 years ago. Moral Mondays had organized. Yet, do you ever see anything in the media about what is going on there? And they have organized, it's led by, Reverend Barber is an evangelical minister who supports LGBTQ issues, environmental justice, reproductive justice, voter registration, prison enfranchisement, all of those issues. Yet we don't hear about that. And the reason that they've been successful is that they are organized. And they have some old-time civil rights organizers in the organization. They also have vibrant young people, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, who are organizing. They have youth training sessions so that they mobilize and organize. And how many of you knew that there were 80,000 people marching in Raleigh? I see 3 hands, 4 hands. Okay? Figure out why you don't know this is happening.
You know, working in media and seeing what is being reported and what isn't, I feel your distress. I'm from a country that has experienced what is supposed to have been a miracle transition. And that miracle transition is bullshit. Anybody now who comes to me with some Mandela-esque, oh wow, how wonderful, Rainbow Nation, bullshit. What you're not seeing in the media, and when they tell you about white genocide, when 88% of the country is still being owned by the same white people that owned it pre-apartheid, is black rage. It is anger. A lot of what is called the heightened violence in South Africa, it's rage. We are angry, and what you're not seeing in the media is the organizing. What you're seeing is the mediocrity, you're seeing incompetent president, you're seeing incompetent ministers. We have structures right now that have no leaders. Like literally, there's no CEO for the South African Broadcasting, there's no CEO or MD or anything for the rail services, there's no MD or CEO for the social services, the grants. SASA has no leader. There's no leaders in about 7 different national institutes right now. So this thing that we fought for is all gone down the drain. But when you look at who's benefiting, when you literally look at this transition and the handshake and who's benefiting, it's quite scary, because you then realize that we were sold out. And unfortunately, the lack of organization has a lot to do with people being disillusioned by the fact that we actually had amazing structures at one point, and that people believed so strongly in these structures. I personally could not belong to the particular structure that we're speaking of, that is now the governing party, because even though many of us who were growing up under apartheid already knew that there were structures and organizations that you could join, because just literally every street had to have a street committee that had to have, membership within this political party or that political party, but mostly we're talking about the ANC, which is the governing party. Although I'm from a Biko conscious kind of point of view, which is very much black power and black consciousness, and that is also, an anomaly considering. But I think having grown up in a situation where everyone belonged, I struggled with this particular belonging as not just black, but black conscious, and just would not follow the rhetoric, but also being queer and being very aware that I am different in kind of pretty much every single aspect, in every respect. And so seeking out an organization, or at least loosely what, group of people that I could identify with. And then finding a movement that seemed to encompass all of me, how, intersection. We knew then that we would be a non-racist, non-sexist, non-discrimination of all sorts type of organization, and it was the first time that I found belonging. And around the time, this is 1988, 1989, the euphoria in the country was already kind of palpable because we almost knew that the apartheid government is coming to an end. They could not sustain themselves anymore. And so it was perfect timing for all the different kind of organizations to emerge. And a lot of those who then survived through up till the new constitution was drafted and adopted, organizations that were very clear about what our mission and agenda was. Unfortunately, post that, everyone relaxed. And what that did was almost created a backlash. I think your Obama backlash might be similar in that, where you got like this amazing achievement, and then everybody thinks, okay, now we can focus on the individual and live. And besides this, what we call in South Africa struggle fatigue, where people have been activists and activisting for all their lives, your parents and your great-grandparents and your great-grandparents before you. Finally, there was a moment and a time where we could now begin to relax and start focus on career, individual, and everyone like aspiring to the pseudo-middle classness that we now have, where everyone is just, the richer you are, the more important you are, the type of thing, the aspiration to capitalism, which is also, now we're all realizing this is a problem all on its own, because now the richer the people get, the handful of people, the majority are desperate and need in South Africa right now. And so now I'm beginning to see again a re-emergence of organizing. Because now people are realizing that without belonging to structures where you can then begin to implement some of the vision that is emerging, that we can't do it as individuals. So even some of us, like myself in particular, who wasn't part of any movements for the last 10 years as I've been individualizing my own filmmaking, and now beginning to go back into communities and beginning to get together and organize, because without these structures and without follow-ups, without knowing what it is, because you can't just march. I mean, we've been having all these marches in South Africa, March Against Corruption, yay, and then what? There's so many different, as you were saying, so many different efforts that need to be put into making sure that things happen. Without structures, without organizing, I mean, yes, we can have our own individual contribution, but I think we are stronger organizing as large groups of people with the same vision. And I think the vision for all of us is some kind of measure of body autonomy and freedom to just be, right?
Thanks for that. I think for me, mass politics and mass organizations are particularly important for acting out one's politics. So, for instance, when you look at an organization which for many black people has been the traditional organization of choice, an organization that people actually consider their own or talk about it in a way that is both personal and political. So when you look at the African National Congress, the ANC, despite its challenges, it's highly organized. There isn't a part of South Africa where you will go where you won't find an ANC member or on any random day finding someone wearing an ANC t-shirt. It's an organization, it works, it functions. It's one thing to stand outside and be critical of those politics. It's another to actually look at the ANC and the way it organizes and the way it's been able to sustain itself with all the challenges and actually draw some lessons from it. I think one of the critical things that has allowed the organization to, and I speak with at least some intimate organization having defined my politics in that way for some time, but having stepped out of it. One of the things that sort of holds the organization together is that whole notion that the organization supersedes individuals. So even when it's messy and it's dirty, you still have people who are setting themselves and saying, but the ANC is bigger than Zuma, so we must get Zuma out, or there's still space. at grassroots level to contest that. I don't believe that anymore, but there's still a significant number of people that believe in that. The second thing is that if you are not linked to organizations, your views also about politics are sometimes divorced from popular sentiment. It's one thing to criticize people for still believing in a particular project. It's another to understand the reasons why they still believe in that particular project. So for instance, I listen to a lot of young people in South Africa today saying things like, oh, but the people continue to vote the ANC because they think the ANC liberated them and they're so grateful to the ANC. That's not the case. With many people that I speak to, people in my family, people who are my friends, there are different reasons. One of them being that people actually feel that it's their organization. So they may not be card-carrying members of that organization, but they see the organization as a critical part of their history, their trajectory, and all of that, and that's what defines it. So being close to organization allows you to, I suppose, get into the head of what people think and all of that. The third issue is that organizations are also not paragons of virtue, right? It's a space to act out your politics. It's a space also to do collective work and to experiment with a whole lot of things. But organizations do become stifling at times. They do undergo challenges. Democratic impulses do get suppressed sometimes. And where there's involvement of money, where there's positions, where there's proximity to state power, you do have politics getting quite diluted. But the critical thing to also remember is that all organizations are contested at whatever time. There's always different contending ideas within organizations. And whenever there's still space to wage a fight back, I'd say stay and wage that fight back, but sometimes the space is completely closed. Sometimes, as well, some of the organizations that I've been involved in where you actually get this major or people being actively forced out of those particular organizations, then when space closes, then maybe it's time to experiment with other things and to look at other things. So I think mass politics is very important for seeing the world beyond your immediate surrounding, for being involved in campaigns. I mean, the organization that I joined, which was the Young Communist League, the fundamental reason why I identified with that organization is that it organized around issues that defined my life and existence. So the basic necessities, public transport that is safe, that is affordable, that is reliable, education that is public, that is free, up to university level, free sanitary towels for young girls, and all of that. So those things, in an organization, you can shape actually the campaigns and the direction. And it's also important for burnout, or dealing with burnout in significant ways. But yeah, organizations are not paragons of virtue. Sometimes we become really, really hurt and wounded in organizations, and the type of organizations that we've been involved in actually preclude us from talking about the hurt and the pain and the victimization and the sexism and all of these other things. So, yeah.
I just want to say real quickly before we end on this question, just like to add to that, or in response to that, to organizations being like essentially a laboratory for the type of world that you want to live in. When internal conflict arises, when there are grievances, when there are, whether it's sexism, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, or whatever within the organization, especially in political organizations where you're literally organizing for a better world, whatever better is for you, you have to create those structures and mechanisms to address the oppressor in all of us when it comes up in your organization. Claudrena is in the audience right now. He's a member of BYP 100 and been key to like developing what our grievance process looks like. There are members of our organization that has harm is just inevitable. In any situation where you have interpersonal like relationships with people, harm is going to happen. Like we never said, oh, this is a safe space. Like safe space is a myth. Yeah. It's a myth. We can't guarantee a safe space, but we can guarantee an accountable space. Right? How do you hold people accountable? How do you respond to harm? How do you deal with that? How do you, maybe it doesn't always look like a restorative or transformative justice process, but how do we do that? How do we address that? in a way that doesn't replicate the systems that we're trying to tear down. Right?
Let's open it up. Questions from the audience?
So thank you all so much for this great panel. The first question is for you, Denise. Thank you so much. And Denise and Bonsu, I actually am interested in you all speaking about what is the work of the intergenerational sort of organizing in this moment, and particularly because you said as an elder, you have a right to critique. And so I'm wondering if there are other ways that elders are needed in the Black liberation movement this time. And the other thing that you all spoke about that I just thought was so brilliant is the way that Black woman as a category has always been a term that is uneasy from the time of even like Sojourner Truth saying, "Ain't I a woman?" And the question is posed, and we somehow assume that the answer is yes. But I wonder if you can all talk about how maybe that category woman is different when it's Black woman. Like what is the use of that category for you? As you are all talking about the ways that that category works and doesn't work, and how you move into it, and sometimes it's just not, it doesn't fit. So I wonder if you can talk about that.
To the first question, I knew you was gonna come beside me. That's all right. So to the first question, I know for me, elders have been really instrumental. So I'm thinking about so Barbara Rinsby, for example, is the first person that I thought of. Y'all know her, she's super dope, Black feminist historian. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to say that, man, Barbara Rinsby is in my email inbox all the time about what's going on, how y'all mobilizing around this, how can I help? And we've had several strategy sessions over the past few months in the advent of the election of 45. Of just what can a united front look like in this political moment? And so, I'm 26 years old, BYP 100, and nobody in BYP 100 is over 35, and a lot of this movement, a lot of movement building organizations that, as you said, I'm in community with are youth-led. It's young people, right? And so we ain't never built no united front before. We've never done that before, right? And so it's invaluable to have folks like Barbara and just other people who've been doing this. We think we on something new. We think we got new ideas and new analysis. We don't. So it was just so helpful to be able to gain not just historical context, but really these are mistakes that we made that you don't have to do when you've been there, but don't do that. Try this instead, or just have that dialogue of just what do you think about this? So that is really invaluable, and I would love to talk to you more and to be saying add you to my network, just so much that's already been done that we don't have to replicate, right? And to the question of Black womanhood, I'm still trying to answer myself. So maybe I can rip off of something that y'all say. But yeah, I don't know if you want to speak to the first question.
I think that years ago, when we lived more in multi-generational households, which that has been pretty much eliminated. I mean, I grew up with fictive kin. Everybody was Aunt somebody, okay? And the whole neighborhood raised you. So, and I knew my grandparents and who my great-grandparents were. I knew my family history from slavery. I could tell you what plantation they were on in Loudoun County, who owned them, who sold them, who my great-great-grandmother poisoned. Come on, grandmother. She was an herb woman. So, when I grew up, there was connective tissue had those. Now, I didn't always agree with some of the old people in my family because they were irritating. But they were always there, and they taught those stories, particularly the women in my family. So I find it unbelievable. I teach women's studies, and I have students who I mentioned in it the other day. I said something about Shirley Chisholm, and the whole class was looking at me like, they had never heard of her. Never. I said, I mean, I don't expect you to know obscure radical revolutionaries and stuff like that, but somebody who ran for president, you know, Shirley Chisholm, you ain't never heard. What? So then I said, well, of course you've heard of Barbara Jordan. Nope. They don't have heard of, I started naming black women. And I said, yeah, and I said, now I'm going to play you something by Nina Simone. Not even with the Zoe Saldana or whatever. But what I'm saying to you is the connective tissue, those umbilical cords, we have allowed the herstories that are ours to be wiped out. And yeah, okay, Soldier of the Truth, Oliver-Velez, and Harriet Tubman, and then Rosa Parks, who was tired and she sat down on the bus. Live. And that's about it. You tell me who they can name. Now, my students come in and they teach me, I now know who, I learned who Beyonce was. That was nice. Not know for a long period of time, because I don't listen to that stuff. I listen to Nina Simone. I do. I'm 70. I don't have to listen to your music, nor do I have to like it. So my students come in and say, you must listen to India Ari, and this is political, and you have to listen to Janaé, and they put it on, and I listen to it, and I pop my fingers a little bit, and then I go back and listen to Nina Simone. We gotta redo it on those reports. If you don't know your history, you don't know where you are today, and you don't know where the hell you're going. It has to be connected.
But can we talk about what is the systemic issue that is the undoing? Because I think it's like, oh, this happened, and we should repair it. But we're not talking about what and why, and therefore it's created a divide. And then we are now in many places saying we should reinstill this connection, but it isn't necessarily going to be what's going to happen, right? Like even in your comment now saying we can critique, but I feel like there's a lot of critiquing, right? For at least the last, in this whole Black Lives Matter, I feel like a lot of our Black women as foremothers and folks who are present are saying there's a lot that's missing here, but it isn't like we're engaging in a dialogue, we're calling an institute together to be able to have come to Jesus moments with our own selves about what we're going to do. There are pockets of moments where that's figuring out, but I think there's a fracturing, like an ongoing fragmentation and fracturing that I'm wondering how do we plug that in order to like regenerate that connective tissue and think about movement forward, not having another like possibility of not knowing.
But there was always fragment. Don't mythologize what we did in the past, because I have been in more splits and counter splits, and they were deadly because we were killing each other, literally. You know, and that doesn't mean that, yes, I know COINTELPRO and the FBI and blah, 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 but some of it had nothing to do with that. It was just some ugly bullshit that got people dead. Now, y'all can fight and fuss and whatever and have Twitter wars, but we literally had guns dead from absolutely ugly stuff. And nobody wants to talk about that either, you know. So it's very nice, and you know, I like being this elder and all this, and we did this, and we organized that, and we did this movement, and blah, blah, blah. But there was stuff that has been also not addressed. And I think that I'm very, very amazed to look at the good things that are happening. The way that, and people say, I don't know why you like that social media stuff. Because I see how when back in the day, when somebody got off by a cop in Oakland, it was pretty much a localized issue. Y'all didn't go off in Harlem or in Atlanta over somebody that got shot in the back in Oakland, you know. And now, I'm amazed. Yeah. My students made me get on Twitter. Read another But what is amazing to me, and that's watching Black Lives Matter take off. And though I think that they could use a little more structure, I think everything could use a little more structure, the magic of the moment, we could never have accomplished that during the time period that we were in. And, but there will always be fragmentation and there will always be bullshit that people get into because human beings just can't resist, you know? And you're right, that's why I really appreciate it when you brought that up, that there are ways that we can still continue on, but don't expect everything to be magical and radical and revolutionary and powerful to people and all that other really happy horseshit, because it doesn't work that way. And we can transcend that which is wrong with us. We can keep transcending because we have to.
I wanna add to that. Can y'all hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. I just want to say, I hear people ask a lot about this like generational divide, and I just really want to debunk the idea of that. I don't think that there are generational divides as much as there are ideological divides. You know, so I agree with the fragmentation because there's fragmentation within this movement for Black Lives. Like people say, you know, this movement has become known as the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's this all-encompassing umbrella of so many different organizations and individuals and organized and unorganized collectives. That's all Black Lives Matter protesters, and I really hate it, but I have to deal with it, I guess. But there are people who are considered activists within this movement that I don't agree with. Ideologically, in terms of what they're fighting for, I don't rock with them. They're my age, right? So, but there are people who are 2 generations ahead of me that I'm like, I rock with you. I stand with you. We could work together, right? And so, you know, I would love for us to be able to be like this totally unified, just like, you know, one step together. This is just not the case. And, you know, there's just sometimes you don't have to make decisions, whether it's as an individual or as an organization, that, like, I don't think that we can actually work together. That's real. I mean, that might not sound like, you know, what I should say, but it's true. Like, consciously made decisions to not actively be in coalition with someone because of the politics that they hold, or because of the way that they, you know, I'm not going to choose to be in struggle with you, and you don't, you know, respect who I am as a person. There are like hella, you know, anti, just like transphobic, homophobic, misogynist, like organizers out here that are encompassing this Black Lives Matter umbrella that I can't rock with, right? And so, you know, there are conversations that are already being had, that are intergenerational, that are trying to figure out how to move forward together in a more, you know, coordinated way, or, you know, what have you. That conversation is happening. Just because it's not visible doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But at the same time, I don't think that we should have this illusion that at some point we're just all going to be, because it's just not going to happen. Nor should it necessarily be an ideal if we know that there's just some people that are not here for us, not fighting for our liberation, right? So.
I think the question you raised is about structure. I think for those of us who are committed to trade union politics, we have to deal with the reality of 30 years of loss of union density. You can't get beyond that. That's the reality. 30 years of loss of union density, 30 years of unions being attacked. When it comes election time, your capacity to organize is not going to be the same.
Right.
And that's a structural reality.
Yeah, I was gonna carry on. I was just a few things to kind of address some of what you're saying. Like, first of all, I was a member of the Occupy movement, and movements kind of come and go in cycles.
Right.
And there are things about Occupy, including the People's Mic, that empowered me. I was a part of Occupy Nashville, and I learned a lot about both mobilizing and organizing from it. But I also realized, as a professor, that history is not self-perpetuating. So there's not going to be anything that's just going to be passed down. Sometimes your parents die and they'll pass that down, or the movement dies and that doesn't get carried on. So there's little small things that all of us need to remind ourselves to do, which is to ask your parents about what happened. Ask some elder that you meet about what happened. Have these small little, we live in a personalization world. Have personalized conversations about big ideas, about structures, instead of just, I like well, were you involved with the movement? What did you do? If you don't know what the Young Lords are, ask what the Young Lords are. Ask the questions for the little stuff. They're like threads. When you pull them, they unravel the whole thing. And the other is that we're dealing with like a population explosion. There's hundreds of little movements, hundreds of different Black Lives Matters. And we constantly have to kind of be micro and macro at the same time. And some of the times it comes from some class you took that just changes your life. But then you got to figure out how to perpetuate that. Like, how do you take that into the next phase of your journey? So I say all of that to say that this panel is like life. Like so full, so full, so full.
Relationships, it's about affinity. I think, as someone who's a part of the Black Lives Matter movement and organizing, and also as someone who's a student of history, like, there's a way that I think criticism outside of relationship, even from the elders, doesn't feel right. But I also think that there is a way, in terms of speaking to ideology, that like literally being in a relationship with folks sort of can engender ideological shifts. There's a way that we just can't walk away from each other. I understand harm, but I think that we also have models to address that. So I'm wondering how like Black girlhood and sort of the lessons that we can learn from Black girls and how they are with one another, like in relationship to each other, might like help us to think about like organizing and this ongoing political project that we have for relationship.
I totally agree with how you prefaced that question. When in my last comment where I basically said, you can't really take everybody with you. That's not like from the jump. I'm saying I know that you got bad vibes and I ain't messing with you. It's really you're right. I don't think that you can really hold people accountable or really even begin the project of trying to engender ideological shifts without having a relationship with someone, right? That's why, one-on-ones or relational meetings or whatever you want to call them are so important in organizing. Just like sitting down with someone and asking, like, what brought you to this work? What are your self-interests? Why are you with, so that's important. And it has to be a precursor to any sort of building. But you can do that. You can try to begin that relationship and build that relationship for it to be to no avail, right? And so at one point or at some point you have to kind of make a decision about how much energy to invest in trying to push something that is immovable at that very micro level. I mean, so one could say the same about trying to dismantle capitalism, and I'm not trying to stop that, but it's something different when you're talking about like an individual person, right? So yeah, I think that that is easier to think about in response to harm, like on the back end, on the reactive end, than it is on the front end of trying to bring people in. I don't know. Here's the other thoughts about that.
Sometimes you have to say no. And I saw the difference between the Young Lords and the Black Panther, for example. And in the Young Lords, we said no. That we were not going to allow sexism to run the organization. Women stood up and we literally kicked all of the men on the Central Committee off. We demoted all of them. And they would have to politicize themselves to be allowed back on. And some left. In fact, we had one that left that was going to come back and shoot people because he was so upset that women had taken over. But we made rules. We said that 50% of the articles had to be written by women in the newspaper or about women's issues. We looked at organizing, and a lot of the basis of what we organized around the environmental justice kind of elements or whatever had to do with women and families and children. And I think, and we refused to be in alliance with, at a time that it was a very sexist, dominant part of the movement, right? And we refused, we had a big fight about that. I mean, a huge fight about who we were going to align with. I literally got up and I got punished, physically punished, for walking out of the meeting because we refused to be in alliance with Imamu and Black House. And because when we went to the meeting, women came into the meeting on their knees with a bowl of fruit on their heads, and whatever. And I was like, what the hell? And women were not allowed to speak. And I said, no, we are not going to make an alliance with them. Sorry, I don't care how wonderful they are, and they had more power and whatever, but we stood on principle. And so there are some places you can give and begin to work with people. You don't have to be completely in alignment, but from my perspective, there are some places where you have to draw the line on principle. Coalition building is, Bernie Reagan said when you're in a coalition and you're comfortable, it's not a broad enough coalition, so you have to, yes, there has to be a level of uncomfortability, but at some point, you just have to say no. So I will not be in alliance with anyone who is transphobic, okay? And I have had problems with certain elements in both the Black and Latino community that don't want to go there. And I show up with my goddaughter is transgender, and we show up places together, and I get into fights because they want to call her he, and I stop people dead right in the middle of stuff and say, I'm leaving unless you get Zoe right, okay? And that's hard, and this is church folk, right?
So, I mean, on the question of relationship building, I think it's a great question. And for me, it just gives me the opportunity to reflect on some of the mistakes that I think we committed when we were in organizations and organized in a particular way or talked about a certain politics. And one of those mistakes is that we didn't do enough relationship building work, right? So we just assumed that because our organization was comprised, the majority of the membership was women in the main, even though the leadership didn't reflect that. So there were few of us were women in the leadership, but the membership was largely women, as is the case you'll find with many organizations. But one of the things that we did do was to, we sort of took it for granted that we had to do the work of building feminist collectives. So we just we assumed that because you're a woman, then you subscribe to a particular politics, you will fight against sexism. We didn't do enough work to build those collectives, and in the end, few people got isolated for those politics. The second thing is that we didn't pay enough attention to social differentiation within the organization itself. So we didn't actually look at the question of us being students, yes, from working class backgrounds, but we're in universities at that time, and how there was a gap or a fissure that existed between us who organized at universities with women, with other activists outside the university space, so in the townships, in the rural areas. And then oftentimes we spoke a vocabulary, and I'm very passionate about this, a vocabulary that was only accessible in the lecture hall. Beyond that, we didn't have. So we said a lot of things that people couldn't understand, and we just thought, why don't they get it? Are they internalized oppression? That's why they don't want to listen. But we spoke a language that nobody really understood, and I'm actually unsure whether we understood it ourselves. And it was a university language. Some of that continues till this day. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes of our time. The third thing is that, yes, we borrowed largely from people we respected. So, and unlike some of your students, we actually know the women that you teach about, and we would gladly just throw these names around and all of that. But I think over time we preached a feminism that was divorced from context. So we spoke with a lot of confidence because we were inspired by Audre Lorde, we were inspired by Angela Davis, we were inspired by many women who are from this particular territory but couldn't say a word about women on the African continent, women in South Africa. So we couldn't, later on I discovered through the academic path that actually, there are these thousands of, when we speak about mining in South Africa and industrialization and migration, we usually think of the men, the gumboots, and the makarapa, or the hard hats, and all of that. But there's a parallel movement of women moving into the cities, often not tied to the male partner, seeking certain things. We could have asked questions about the types of economic activities they engaged in when they arrived at the cities, would have discovered a lot of things about sex work and the history of sex work, about beer brewing and the history of beer brewing, and I myself would have discovered a lot of things about how that legacy actually exists within my family, because the women in my family come from that particular tradition. That would have been a more, a feminism rooted in context, and that doesn't mean it's not international, or that doesn't mean that it's parochial in a sense, but it's more relatable, and I think that's the challenge of the time.
And I think just to add on to that, I think we live in such exciting times, and I think it is possibly the most exciting time we can live in, because if you think about how the whole world is kind of shifting towards fascism, and how world domination now is becoming quite clear again who the enemy is, and I think we lost that for a while, right? And now we are alive, to have these conversations so that nobody is reinventing the wheel, and the fact that yes, we may not be as intergenerational, and these connections may have been lost, but I think the links are coming back. That's why we're here, right? Because there's a realization that these movements have existed, and that a lot of what we've been fighting is back, in different sort of ways, and now we can rethink and reimagine a different future, and remember what we used to reimagine then, and where we faltered, and how we can come back and talk to you guys, because I'm finding in South Africa at the moment we've got the Fees Must Fall movement that is also falling apart, right? In its own way, it's had its successes, but it's falling apart. And it's falling apart largely because of the interpersonal politics because of the fragmentation that we've been speaking of. But at the same time, these young people are reinventing and reimagining things. And it's incredible because they're not just saying we want free university education, they're saying in actual fact, we have done the algorithm. We have calculated it. It is possible. This is how it is possible. Let's go. Do you know what I mean? So the resistance is very clear that it has nothing to do with the fact that there's no money for it. So you know when you're being lied to. And I think having social media is also amazing in the sense that we are now being very clearly kind of told how, and you can see where the media is lying to us. And now people are beginning to wake up to where the lie is. And I think the more of us understand and realize where the lie, because we didn't know where the lie was when we were growing up. We just knew that something was wrong. Now we know where the lines are, we know where the lie is, and we can do something about it. And I think these exchanges are for me so exciting because then I'm beginning to hear more from you and how you want to see things, and I can then share what my experience was in trying to do the same thing, and this is for me a beginning of a different kind of prevention. We know and understand that we are under siege. As Black people, as Black queer people, as Black females, we understand that we are under siege. How we operate is up to us. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah?